Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we'll talk about the meninges of the brain. The meninges. What do we mean by meninges? Meninges, actually it is the plural of meninges, which means membrane. So the meninges of the brain is the membranes that cover the brain. Its function is the protection of the brain when any trauma to the head from outside. These membranes will give protection to the delicate intracranial tissue, which is the brain and cerebellum, and also these membranes cover the spinal cord and also give protection to the spinal cord. Now, before speaking about these covering and these meninges, I would just repeat for you what are the contents of the cranial cavity. The cranial cavity contents include, number one is the, as you know, is the cerebrum. and السيربرم هو المخ ويتكون من two hemisphere, which is right and left. The second content is the cerebellum, and of course it's also right and the left hemisphere. The third content is the meninges, and these meninges, which is our subject today to discuss, includes the dura mater, three meninges, dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and three, the pia mater. The other contents of the cranial cavity is the blood vessels, of the brain and cerebrum. Others, nerves, cranial nerves. And these cranial nerves, of course, as you know, 12 cranial nerves. Cranial nerve number 1, which is olfactory. Cranial nerve number 2, which is optic. The third is oculomotor. The fourth is trochlear. The fifth is the trigeminal. The sixth is the abducent. The seventh is the facial nerve. The eighth is the vestibulocochlear. And the ninth is the glossopharyngeal. And the 10th is the vagus. And the 11th cranial nerve is the accessory cranial nerve. And lastly, we have the 12th cranial nerve, which is the hypoglossal nerve. So all these are the contents of the cranial cavity. Other content is the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. And this also spinal fluid produced within the brain ventricles, and it gives also support and it decreases the weight of the brain, and also it supplies nutrition to the brain tissue. So this is cerebrospinal fluid, and the abbreviation of this name is the CSF. So all these things are the contents of the cranial cavity. We have the cerebrum, we have the cerebellum, and also, of course, here we have the other thing is the brain stem. A brain stem, which is the جذع الدماغ, and it's composed of midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. So all these things are the contents of the cranial cavity. All these contents are protected and covered by a membranes, and these membranes is our subject to be discussed now, is called the meninges. I will draw for you simple diagram to show you how these meninges cover the central nervous system, including the brain and the spinal cord. Here we have the brain, you see. All of you remember how I draw. This is the brain. And of course here we have the midbrain, and after the midbrain we have the pons. After the pons we have the medulla oblongata, and then spinal cord, and of course this is the cerebellum. So this is the pons, the cerebellum. This is the midbrain. This is the pons. This is medulla oblongata. This is midbrain. And of course this is the cerebellum. And this is the cerebellum. So this simple diagram is the central nervous system. This meninges will surround the first layer, which attached to the very near and the most inner layer, and it passes within the sulci of the brain, above the gyri here, sulci, gyri, and so on. And this is actually the first, or the inner layer, and this is called the pia mater, which is in close relation with the spinal cord and the brain. This is the pia mater. The outer layer, or the other layer which is outer to the pia mater, is the arachnoid. And of course this is the arachnoid. This is the arachnoid. You see, this is the arachnoid. This is the arachnoid surrounding the brain and all this. Of course, this is the arachnoid because it contains multiple trabeculae, and the meaning of the arachnoid is spider. Just looks like just legs of spider. So it is called arachnoid mater. And of course the pia means al-hanun, which is attached or in close proximity or runs over the surface of the cerebellum and other part of the central nervous system. The third layer is called the most outer layer between the brain and the skull, is the dura mater, and this is the dura mater. Of course, this is spinal cord. Pass round the spinal cord, going up, and this is the dura mater. So these are the three. This is a simple picture show to you. This is the most outer layer is the dura mater. And the second layer is the arachnoid matter. And the last one, this green one, is the pia mater. Okay, so it's clear that these are layers surrounding the central nervous system, called the meninges. Here I put to you this simple, this another picture just to revision of the parts of the brain. You see, if you remember this model in our lab when we studied the brain in the first few lectures. You see, if you remember this picture, okay, we have this one, this part of the brain, which is cerebellum. This is the cerebellum, okay, and this is the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. And here we have the cerebellum. You know, this is the cerebellum. Cerebellum. And here we have the midbrain. This is the midbrain. Midbrain. And this is the pons. And this is the medulla. Medulla. Oblongata. Oblongata. And of course, the end of the medulla oblongata, it ends with the spinal cord. So all these plans, of course, this is the thalamus. This is the lateral ventricle. This is the lateral ventricle of the brain. The lateral. We will study it in the next lecture. And this is the third ventricle. Of the brain. And of course, the thalamus. Here is the thalamus, because the third ventricle, the ventricle brain is between the two thalami, the right and left thalamus, between these. And of course, this is the hypothalamus. This area is the this is the thalamus also. This is the thalamus. And this area is the hypothalamus. Okay, and of course, this is the pituitary gland, which sit in the cella turcica of the body of the sphenoid bone. So all this, of course, this is the fourth ventricle, which is posterior to the pons and medulla, and between the cerebellum and the pons and medulla. This is the fourth. This is the fourth brain ventricle. See? Of course, the parts of the cerebrum. This is the frontal part. Here is the parietal, and behind is the temporal, and here is the occipital. Occipital lobe. These are the lobes. Occipital. Here is parietal and temporal below it, and this is part of the temporal. Here is clear, and of course this is the frontal lobe. So all these are parts of the brain or the cerebrum and related ventricles. Of course, inshallah, in the next lecture we will talk about these ventricles and how it is connected: lateral, third ventricle, fourth ventricle, and the aqueduct cerebri, and the phenomena that presents causing connection between these ventricles. I will discuss it later on, inshallah. Here is another picture. We show you the real brain. You see, this is the corpus callosum. This is the corpus callosum. And of course, this is the thalamus. And between the two thalami, right and left, we have the third ventricle. And here we have the hypothalamus. Of course, we have the thalamus and hypothalamus. And here we have an epithalamus. All these is called diencephalon. It's called diencephalon. And of course, here's the midbrain. This part is the midbrain. And this bones and medulla oblongata. And lastly, here the medulla oblongata end with the spinal cord, which pass in the vertebral canal. And of course, this is the cerebellum, and all this is the cerebellum. So this is the brain. Simple description of the parts of the brain. Now we will talk about the dura in details. The first layer, as we said, the outer layer is the dura mater. This dura mater actually is composed of two layers. The outer layer is called periosteal or industrial layer, and the inner one is called the meningeal layer. I will draw to you this simple picture, and you will see these layers of the dura. Well, this is your head. This is the skull bone. This is the skull bone. And of course, outside the skull, we have the, what's the structure? The scalp. This is the scalp. This is the scalp. Now, the dura, as we said, it's composed of two layers. The outer layer is called periosteal layer. Here, we will draw the first layer of the dura mater, and it is called the periosteal layer or industrial layer. This is very attached very strongly to the bone. Attached to the bone. This layer is attached to the bone, and the second layer of the dura mater is called the meningeal layer. Meningeal layer. Here, meningeal layer attached to the first layer, outer layer of dura, but in certain places, this meningeal layer, of course, suppose that this is in the, also, this is periosteal, so this is the ear. Here, the meningeal layer not attached in certain places, separate from the outer layer. And when it is separated, you see, here, it bends between the two hemispheres. This is the right and this is the left hemisphere. So when it separates from the meningeal separates from the outer layer, it will form this space. And this space contains venous blood. This contains venous blood. So it is called dural venous sinus. Dural venous sinus. So it's called dural venous sinus. How it is formed? It is formed by separation of the meningeal layer, and this is perosteal layer. Perosteal layer, and this is meningeal layer. Of course, both of them are dura mater. Okay, dura mater like this. See my hand? This is the dura mater. This is the outer, and this is the inner. In certain places, this dura or two layers of the matter separate from each other, forming this space. So this space is called dural venous sinuses, and it contains blood. It drains. It is the blood drained from the brain and intracranial structures. All the venous blood is drained to these sinuses, and then this sinus with other sinuses, intracranial sinuses. We have many intracranial sinuses. Also, we'll discuss it later on, inshallah. All these sinuses, their blood connected on the right and on the left, and ends with a single venous sinus that drain into the internal jugular vein. It passes to the jugular foramen, and once it passes to the jugular foramen, it becomes the internal jugular vein, and this will return to the right side of the heart. You see also here, the dural spaces are present in many sides of the intracranial of the skull. So like here, suppose that this is also the meningeal. It's also separated to form another sinuses, like here or here, any place. This contains venous blood. Venous blood. So this is the venous sinuses, and how it is formed. It's formed by separation of these two layers of the dura mater. The second layer, we have the arachnoid matter, and here the arachnoid matter. We draw it like this. The arachnoid, it passes to the second layer that covers the brain tissue. Of course, this is another sinus here. This is also another sinus, venous sinus. And this, of course, is called the upper part of the skull, the bottom of the skull. This is called superior sagittal sinus, and this is the inferior sagittal sinus. So the arachnoid here, the arachnoid cover the second layer. Here we have the arachnoid. Why, as we said, why it's called arachnoid? Because it contains many trabeculae, and these trabeculae looks like the leg of the spider. So arachnoid is called the al-ankabutiyah. The third layer is the pia mater. I will draw the brain tissue. Here we will reach the brain tissue. This is the brain tissue, and you see this is gyri, and this is sulci, gyri, sulci, gyri, sulci, and so on. You see, this is the brain tissue. Yes, this is the brain tissue, the cerebrum, and all this is, you know, this is called gyrus, and the plural of it is gyri, and this is sulcus, a furrow between each gyri, which is called sulci, or the plural of sulcus. And of course, as you know, in the brain we have an outer, this is called the cortex of the cerebrum. This is the cortex of the cerebrum, and it is gray, also called gray matter. Why it is gray matter? Because it contains the bodies of the neurons, the body cell of the neurons. All the body cells are presented here, giving this darker appearance or darker color of the cortex. And the remaining part, of course, at the cerebrum is the white matter, and the white matter is a myelinated axons with a myelin sheath. This is the cortex, or a gray matter. Cortex. And this is the white matter, or medulla. Okay, so here's the brain tissue. The pia mater here is in a close attachment, and also a dip in the sulci and cover. You see, this is the pia mater. This is the pia mater that pass within the sulci, between the gyri. So this is the third layer of the meninges, which is called the pia mater. And of course, this is the arachnoid. Matter. Beneath the arachnoid matter, beneath this layer, beneath this arachnoid, we have a space which is called subarachnoid space. And this subarachnoid space here, it lies between the arachnoid and the pia mater, contain the cerebrospinal fluid and all the major blood vessels of the brain and cerebrum. So the blood vessels are floating within the CSF in the subarachnoid space. Here, this is the subarachnoid space. This is the subarachnoid. Here, this is the arachnoid matter, and this is the pia mater. Between the arachnoid and the pia mater, we have space. This space is called subarachnoid space. And as I said, the cerebrospinal fluid run within this space, surrounding the brain, and within the brain, the ventricles of the brain, and also around the spinal cord. And also, as I said, in addition to the CSF, this space contains the main blood vessels of the brain, the main blood vessels and its branches, all the branches, and it's floating within this space. Okay. Now, the dura matter the dura matter, first layer, this, it gives extensions, membranous folds. And this extension membranous folds like this is the first one, this diagram, is called the falx cerebri. And this falx cerebri separate the right from the left hemisphere of the brain. So this is a tough tissue of dura that pass between the right and left hemisphere, and this is called the cerebral falx cerebri. Falx means in Arabic like منجل، شكل المنجل، تشبه شكل المنجل، فيسموها falx cerebri. I will show the picture of this falx cerebri. Here we have, yes. Now you see this picture. Yes, this is the sinus. This is a coronal section. This is a coronal section. And this is a sagittal section. And you know what's the difference between coronal. Coronal section is a vertical plane. If you remember, it's a vertical plane that divide the body into anterior and posterior part. So this is a coronal section. But here is a sagittal section that divide the plane that divide the body into right and left, symmetrical right and left. So here in this section, we show you this sinus, which is this sinus here. The sagittal appear like this, extending from anterior here to the posterior cranial fossa here. So above this is the brain. Above the brain, we have this sinus, which is called superior sagittal sinus. And below this sinus, you see this line, I draw this line, is called the falx cerebri. It is a matter of membranous septum, separate between the right hemisphere from the left. Here is removed from the street. So this pleura, when extend downwards between the two hemispheres, it forms this structure which is called falx cerebri. You see, this is falx cerebri. Here. Also, of course, this is the first membrane extension, and also we have another membranous extension. Another membranous extension of the pleura includes the, you see in this picture, this is another picture showing this is the falx cerebri, and also we have another falx here, extension posteriorly, maybe in the other picture better. Okay, no problem. Here, this extension is called falx cerebelli. This is falx cerebelli. Let's separate this one, falx cerebelli. Falx cerebelli, that's falx cerebrum. That's falx cerebrum. This is falx cerebrum because it is between the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. Whenever this extension or this membranous extension from the dura between the right and left hemisphere of the cerebellum is called falx cerebelli. Also here we have another extension. This is divided here. This extension of the dura pass in this way. You see, that's in this way. This is another extension of the dura, and this is called tentorium cerebelli. This is called tentorium cerebelli. Tentorium cerebelli is also an extension of this dura, it's covering of the brain, forming like a tent-like structure. Tent يعني خيمة. And this tent-like structure is called tentorium cerebelli. Below it, we have here, below this tentorium cerebelli, we have the, what's the structure here? We have the cerebellum. So it separates this tentorium cerebelli, separate the cerebrum. Here we have the cerebrum, also we have the cerebrum here. Separate the cerebrum from the cerebellum. It's just like a tent-like structure of dura matter, and also it is it form a roof of the posterior cranial fossa. You know the cerebellum is and the brain in the posterior cranial fossa. So this is cerebellum cerebelli form the roof of the posterior cranial fossa. Below this roof we have the cerebellum. So the first thing we have the falx cerebri. This is falx cerebri. Cerebrum أو cerebri, falx cerebri. وعندنا falx tentorium cerebelli. وعندنا هنا أيضا posteriorly this picture not clear, but here it is present here. Falx cerebri, falx cerebrum, cerebri أو falx cerebri. Here we have this the falx cerebelli. Also the dura matter also extends covering the sella torsica. Here we have the sella torsica. Here it is removed. Small part of this dura will cover the sella torsica, and this cover diaphragma celli is called diaphragma celli. Through this diaphragmatic structure or this membranous extension of the dura mater, in the center of it, it will be burst by the stalk of the pituitary gland that present in the sella torsica and attached to this stalk that pierced the diaphragma celli to attach above to the hypothalamus. So these are the four extensions of the dura mater: the falx cerebri, the falx cerebelli, the tentorium cerebelli, and the diaphragma celli that cover the sella torsica. That's all about the dura. Just we have the blood supply of the dura mater, حقيقة of the dura. We have main blood supply, which is called the middle meningeal artery, and middle meningeal artery is the blood supply of the meninges, of course, right and left, with other small arteries also that present from the vertebral arteries supply the posterior part of the dura. But most of the meninges are supplied by the middle meningeal artery, which is a branch from the first part of maxillary artery. And of course, as you know, maxillary branch of maxillary artery. And as you know, of course, it will enter the midicranial fossa through which foramen? It will enter through foramen spinosum. Foramen spinosum. Through foramen spinosum, middle meningeal artery, which branch of the first part of maxillary artery, it will enter the midicranial fossa, and then after that it passes between the dura and the skull bone and the inner aspects of the inner surface of the skull bone, and of course then it will branch to supply all the dura of that cover the brain. The second layer is the arachnoid, as we said, and this arachnoid, you see layer, is passed above or below the dura mater, and it crosses the sulci. It doesn't dip within the sulci. No, it passes over the brain tissue, over the sulci and the gyri, and will cover all the brain. And it is vascular, of course, and it contains some blood vessels within it, and below it we have this space which is called the subarachnoid space that contains the CSF and most of the blood vessels that supply the brain and veins that drain into the sinuses. The third layer, as I said, is the pia mater, which is highly vascular, and this pass enclose with the brain tissue, and it passes through the crypts or the sulci of the brain like this, and complete covering to the sulci and gyri, and of course it is highly vascular layer, through it the branch of the arteries and the vein that leaves the brain tissue leave through this layer. Thank you. That's all about the meninges. Thank you.